All right, let's look at our agenda briefly. You will see that there's a lot we're going to do together, and we will get it done. So we are going to take a walk in the woods, and then we're going to look at some specific trees of stewardship that matter. And then we're going to get into sort of the essentials, forestry essentials as they're called, and then what next steps we have to take. So that's our ambitious agenda, and let's get going. Before we do, though, there's a few things that I want to make sure that we all understand and agree on, that I'm not making any assumptions as we take this journey together. And the first one is just sort of a basic understanding of stewardship. At MMFA, we like to say that stewardship is all we do all the time with all we have and all we are. So I want to make sure that we are starting from a place of mutual agreement around what we mean when we use that word stewardship. The second thing, and if you don't know what you mean when you use that word at your church, there's your first to do after the webinar, is make sure you've got a good understanding of what that word means. The second thing that I want us to think about is the fact that it's an anxious world. We hear lots of reports about how the church is dying or declining. And what do we know for sure? We know that the world is changing. We know that as Moravians, as people of faith, we want the church not just to survive, but we want it to thrive. And regardless of our efforts or whatever's happening in the world around us, we know that Jesus has a really amazing history of bringing people together for God's work, for healing a broken world. So as we go forward, just want to remember that the church is Jesus' idea, not ours. Next thing to think about is that the mission, whatever we are doing, is God's mission, not ours. So as we get focused on stewardship in our ministries, what that means, how we make gifts, what we do with our gifts, whatever mission that we are on is all about God. And we should keep that front and center for everything that we do, every conversation that we have about stewardship. That mission is God. It's God's work that we are called to, and it's for the glory of God. It's not about us. Fourth, really important, is that we were made in God's image. And one thing we know about God is generous. So we were created to be generous. We are wired for stewardship. We want to be helpful. We want to meet people's needs. We want to help others who are experiencing trauma, all the different ways that we act out in our stewardship. So if we're not talking about it at our churches, that's a misstep, right? Because we're wired for it. We're made for it. We are God's children, and we're made to be generous like God. And then finally, something that we know for sure is that steward formation is mostly taking place at church. If you are not teaching people about stewardship, if you're not forming them and helping them on that journey as part of their discipleship, that's probably not happening anywhere else in their lives. So again, it's a misstep if we shy away from or even don't talk about stewardship at all, because this formation that's so key and essential in our journey as disciples is pretty much only happening in the church setting. So with those sort of foundations in place, as we get ready to walk, we're going to head into the woods. So I want you to think for a second, what comes to your mind when you hear that word forest? Maybe you think of childhood fairy tales, because a lot of them had woods, didn't they? So the woods were a place that held secrets, they posed challenges. Sound sometimes traveled strangely. There were roots that could be hazards. And if you took a wrong turn, oftentimes you could get lost. I hope you already see how a forest is a really great metaphor for the church, because you may have had those kinds of experiences within your church too, right? Maybe when you think of a forest, you think of your own experiences in one, hiking, seeing wildlife, exploring. Maybe you're drawing closer to God through that time that you spend in the woods. Regardless of whether you are an outdoorsy person or not, again, a forest is a really great metaphor for the church in general, and specifically for stewardship. You, of course, have heard the phrase, can't see the forest for the trees, which is implying that because we're so focused on one or two aspects of something, we can't appreciate or even see the bigger picture, because we become hyper aware of something that's right in front of us, and we can't step back and see the entire woods. So when you think about stewardship forest at your church, in your ministry, are there certain aspects that you're focusing on heavily? Maybe rightfully so. But is there a chance that by focusing so heavily on those one or two things about stewardship, you're missing a holistic, integrated picture of stewardship? We'll talk more about this at the end because I want to hear from you all about any trees that are getting in the way of your ability to see your whole stewardship forest, but invite you to consider that. What are those trees that might be keeping you from seeing the whole picture, the whole forest at your church? For a lot of our ministries, that's money. We're very aware of money and its role. Financial stewardship is really important. But sometimes if we're really focused on that, we may be missing the bigger picture of stewardship and the things we really need to be thinking about as we form faithful and generous stewards. So let's think about a few things in our forest that are important to consider as we talk about stewardship, as we think about how we're going to talk about stewardship over the months ahead. And the first thing is individuals. Your community of faith is there. It's the body of Christ because it's a group of people who've come together with a mission and a vision and a love for one another and for the world. So you've got people in the pews, right, who are part of your stewardship forest. So those folks arrive at your church on any given day, Sunday or any other day of the week, with a set of values that guide their beliefs, that guide their behavior, right? So if we're going to think about stewardship and wanting people to give in a certain way, whether it's time or talent, we need to be aware of what their values are, what's important to them. I'll give you an example. If somebody in your church values service, then they might be really active in supporting a veterans organization, or maybe they value compassion. And so they're big on animal welfare and are giving of time and talent and treasure to an animal adoption agency. We all have values, and ideally those values are guiding our behavior and what we're doing, how we're stewarding our time and our talent and our treasure. So if your church has spent some time in conversation around why people aren't showing up, why people aren't giving, and those are common questions when we think about stewardship, it's worth thinking, what are the values of these individuals that make up our congregation or our fellowship? What do they care about? How do we know that? And how do we talk about that and make space for that as we plan for how the church is going to minister to people? So values are really important. We all have them and we all use them. Another thing that's really important are our motivations. When we think specifically about financial stewardship and about money, research shows that there are 4 motivations that everybody could have related to how they view money. So one of those is freedom. One is security, one is power, and one is love. So think a minute about yourself, because you are an individual that's part of the forest in your ministry, and what your own motivations are when it comes to what you do with money. So how would you complete this sentence? I feel that money is important because blank. Maybe you think money is important because it enables you to do what you want to do. Maybe you think money is important because it's something that helps you buy gifts for people and let people know that you care about them. Maybe money is important because then you know that you'll have what you need and you can have a comfortable and successful life counting on a certain level of financial stability. So those point to your different money motivations and how you make decisions around money. We as churches have money motivations as well. And a lot of times when MMFA works with churches, especially trustees, we'll get to discover with them how they view decisions around money. I tend to see a lot of security and a lot of love as motivation. Security meaning we're going to save this money for a rainy day in case we need it, especially around property management and maintenance, right? And then another motivation is love. Of course, we're going to give this money to this mission in our community or this particular group. So oftentimes those are heavy motivations for churches. We all have these motivations. There's a whole quiz that you can do to discover what yours are. It's a lot of fun to do those in a church if you're willing to risk talking about money, and you need to be. But I share this with you for your forest because, again, everybody that's part of your ministry has their own motivations around money. And we are misstepping if we're not trying to discern what those are, as well as be transparent about what they are when it comes to the church's financial decisions. And then finally, the other thing that's happening when we all come together as the body of Christ in our churches is that we arrive with different experiences. What do I mean that? So generationally, we've all had different experiences. When you look back at the different groups and major events that have happened in the world that have impacted those different groups, we've got wars, we have 9/11, we have pandemic, we have the prevalence of school shootings, all kinds of things that are really impacting different generations in different ways. And that impacts their stewardship. That impacts their decisions about what they do with their time and their skills and their money, because those events are shaping them and changing them. We all have our experiences within the church. It's common for me to hear people say, oh, we have a pastor that doesn't like to talk about stewardship, so we don't talk about stewardship. And stewardship has become something to avoid. Or we have a pastor who wants to talk about stewardship, but they've been told don't talk about money. So within the church, everybody arrives with their own experiences around stewardship, and those may be really good, they may be not so good, but they are real, and you all as stewardship leaders want to be aware of them, want to learn what they are. And then finally, we're all living day to day. The experiences of the world around us are impacting us, and they certainly are having an impact on our stewardship, how we decide to use the 24 hours that we have any given day. So again, when we think about the individuals in our forest, they are coming to us with their own set of values, their own motivations around money and stewardship, and their own experiences. And then we have those collectively as churches as well. So before we start talking about stewardship and what we're going to do with stewardship this fall, it's important to think about the individuals who are part of that conversation. Next, I want to talk a little bit about temperature. What do I mean by that? What is the temperature of your community of faith? How are people feeling about the church, and how do you know? Here's something that we observe a lot in our work with ministries. It's something that's called loud silence. So people haven't told you anything about how they feel about church. They just stop showing up. So their behavior is to step away rather than to say anything about how they feel about your ministry. So I'm going to advocate that we need to ask, we need to be in conversation with people, especially when we're thinking about budgeting for the coming year. So oftentimes churches look at the budget from the current year, and that's what they build on for the coming year. And there's not a lot of input from those individuals that are out there in the forest, so to speak. And I think, again, this could be a misstep for you. So what's an easy way to take the temperature of your forest, either during worship as a part of your worship, or perhaps as a special event after worship? I'm going to invite you to let people share hopes and concerns. Give them sticky notes, green sticky notes for your hopes, blue sticky notes for your concerns. People can write one hope for the church for the coming year. Let's say, this is my hope for my Moravian church in 2025. This is a concern I have for our church in the coming year. Let people write those down. If you're doing this during worship, let ushers collect them, bring them forward. If you do it as part of an event, have a way people can post those if you want folks to be able to look at them in the moment. However you shape it, it's a way for people to have voice and share things with you and prevent that loud silence. It lets people know that you as leaders care about their opinions and how they feel. And it also helps guide your decisions, not just around stewardship, but about ministry in general. So hopes, concerns, I think, are two things that oftentimes we end up making decisions based on what we think people's hopes or concerns are, but we haven't given them a structured way to share those with us that's safe and healthy and meaningful for them. And then you as church leaders can receive all of these and let the congregation know, we're going to report back to you. These are going to drive decisions, however you feel comfortable utilizing them. But I think this is a really simple and can even be a fun way to learn those hopes and concerns and take that temperature of your forest. And then our final forest consideration is around this word change. Is it time to change? I think if I were to survey you all, to survey all of our churches, most of us know we've got to change. We've got to evolve. We have to be willing to do things differently or even do new things. But before you just say, we're going to change for change's sake, or how can we change and do it in a way that's going to lead to the most success, there's some things for you to think about. One of the things that for you to think about is, and I hear a lot from people, well, we don't really need to talk about stewardship. We're doing fine. We've got enough money. Folks are involved. We're happy with people coming to worship. Everything's kind of status quo. I actually heard a stewardship leader tell me not recently, we seem to just be happy as clams to keep on going on the way we've been going, even though we're $10,000 behind budget and nobody wants to serve on the board anymore. You may have experienced this kind of situation in your ministry. I hope not, but if you are or have, know that you're not alone. So sometimes our contentment leads to our being complacent, and that's a dangerous place to be because we're probably missing chances to evolve, to change that would be really meaningful for our ministry, because we're okay just going to our love feasts and doing and holding up our traditions. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with love feast, of course, but we've got to be aware of when it's time to change things and why. So just pay attention to whether folks, if you think they are content in your ministry, that you're not in that dangerous place of becoming complacent and missing opportunities to answer God's call to your ministry that might lead you in a new or different direction. Now, I love math. I was never very good at it, but I love it. And I was delighted to find there's a formula for change. So I will source this at the end of the slide, but you see some numbers here, or some letters, some math here. And this is our formula for change. What does it look like exactly? This is what some folks that have done research around change, and especially systems, have learned. So change can take place if you have a number of people who are dissatisfied, and you have a vision for a new future, and you have steps identified, those first steps that you're going to take to get you towards that new vision. And you've got leadership that's creative and ready to do this. If those things are in place, they are greater than the resistance to the change, then your change may be successful. So I'm going to give you a second to think about that in your own ministry. Do you feel like there are folks that are dissatisfied with certain aspects? Not saying that they don't like church at all, but are there certain things within the church that folks are dissatisfied with? My experience with that for Moravians is a level of dissatisfaction, you can call it unhappiness even, around the number of people who are coming to worship in person on Sundays, the number of children who are involved in ministries, the number of parents of young children who are involved. So that might be a specific area that comes to your mind around dissatisfaction. Okay, well, do you have a vision for what you would like that to look like? And do you have some steps to get there? And is your leadership ready to do it? Are they creative and have a good mindset around implementing some change? If so, are those greater than the resistance that you will get to the change? The worst thing to have happen is to make a change without taking in enough information around it, taking the temperature, what we just talked about, and then having people that try to sabotage it. You may have experienced that before too. Especially this happens with financial stewardship. Churches that have not been talking as much about it, inviting people to consider their financial commitments to God's work in through the church, they find resistance then if they suddenly want to start talking about it. So think this through carefully. Even if you're not a formula person, you can figure out whether these particular aspects, how they're at play in your ministry, and what you can do about them. And there's the source for that. There's 3 different folks that worked on this formula. So we've thought a little bit about the individuals in our forest. We've thought a little bit briefly about what is the temperature in said forest. And we've considered whether it's time to change anything in the forest. So I think we are about ready to look now at some trees. Before we do that, a little bit of humor. I always like to insert some humor. We are going to take the high road, of course, as we step further into the forest and look at these trees. What is our first tree? Jesus. Let me back up and say that our stewardship is about God, right? God created us to be stewards. We were created to be generous, and God sent Jesus for a lot of reasons, one of them being to provide an example for us on how to live. And we are following Jesus. We are Christians, and we are trying to learn more and follow the example that Jesus has set for us. So I think Jesus is a wonderful, logical tree for you to focus on as you think about your stewardship ministry over the coming months. At MMFA, when we talk about a stewardship church, we talk about 4 essential components. You may be familiar with those if you've worked with us at all on stewardship. One of them is theology. We always invite churches to make sure you're grounded in what the Bible says about stewardship. This is a practical way to do that, to shape everything that you're doing around Jesus and Jesus's teachings and ministry as a model for what we do as stewards. Why is this important? Again, Jesus is showing us the way for all aspects of life, but especially for stewardship. When we think about Jesus, who was he? What did he do? How did he show us to step towards other people? What were those examples that he set for us and how we were to be in relationship with other people? And if we understand all of this and learn about all this, then what does it mean for how we choose to behave as we follow Christ? The other thing that's important to think about related to stewardship and Jesus is stewardship is discipleship, plain and simple. I actually know some churches that don't use the word stewardship as much for a variety of reasons, but they focus on the discipleship aspect. When we think about our stewardship efforts in our churches, and if we don't give people a chance to explore their relationship with time, with talent, with treasure, we are in essence freezing them in a certain spot on their discipleship journey, right? I'm going to say that a different way. If we're not inviting people to think thoughtfully and honestly about their decisions in their lives around their money specifically, again, they are going to get stuck at a certain point. So Jesus had a lot to say about money. You know that. We're not going to get into that today because that's its whole other webinar. But there's a lot of his example that we can follow. And if we anchor stewardship as a form of discipleship, sometimes people are more willing to consider it and to learn about it. The other thing that's interesting to me when we think about Jesus as sort of the ultimate steward, it's that move that happens with Jesus, that stewardship goes from being about law to love. Specifically, that means in the Old Testament, stewardship was very much about responsibility. You had to do it. It was the law. And then Jesus arrives on the scene, and suddenly stewardship is about love. And I think that's just a lovely, repeat the word, but beautiful way to think about stewardship as this act of love. We get to do it. It's what God wants for us. And Jesus is showing us the way through the love that he shared in his ministry. So as stewardship leaders, I know that you probably have experienced all kinds of resistance to stewardship conversations. What would it be like to think about having those stewardship conversations with Jesus at the center of them? I'm really having trouble with this arrow today to get this to advance. I apologize. Our second tree that we're going to think about is your why. You may remember many years ago, I think it was 2010, Simon Sinek gave a TED Talk that has now been viewed over 60 million times. And it's called Start With Why, How Great Leaders Impact Change. That later became a book. And in it, Simon presents this concept of the golden circle. And what does the golden circle look like? You see why in the middle, and then a circle for how, and a circle for what. So what does this mean for churches and for stewardship? Why in the middle? That is that core belief or purpose of your ministry, that reason behind why you do what you do. People's stewardship is supporting that why. That why is bigger than your budget. It's about people being able to fulfill their potential as God's children. And it shows them that our stewardship is not just invited, but it's required, not to keep the church going, but for something that's a lot bigger, for our relationship with God. And if your ministry doesn't know its why or can't articulate what it means in terms of stewardship, your gifts of time, talent, treasure, help our church do this core why. I'm going to invite you to spend some time on that. Again, when MMFA talks about the 4 essential aspects of a stewardship church, we say mission and vision as one of those. That's the why. It's at the center of everything that you're doing. It should inspire people. It should get them excited to respond. And if you think, gosh, that's not happening at my church, what can you do to get there? How can you articulate your why? And then you see those other parts of the golden circle that Sinek presents. And how is there. That's the process for achieving the why. From a stewardship perspective, that's gifts of talent and treasure and time and much more. So those are the how we make the why happen. And then finally, there's the what. Those are the ministries, what the church offers, what invites me to steward everything that God has entrusted to me, to help the church with its why. So I think our churches are pretty good usually about talking about their different missions and ministries and those what's. You can get involved in all these different ways. And we've got our wonderful menu of all the different things that the church is offering. So lots of what's, but we don't always say why we do them. And when we get to the end and sort of talk about some practical strategies around each of these, I'll share with you a way you can help people connect these dots and get there to the why. If you are a science geek and you like learning about the brain, I'm going to encourage you to get on and make sure that you see Simon's TED Talk. Link will be in what we share with you later, because he gets into the brain and the different parts of the brain that respond to certain messaging. And that why part is the emotional memory, feel-good limbic part of the brain that it's essential for us to activate if we want people to behave differently. So what is your why for your ministry? If you are able to answer that, great. How can you make that the center of everything that you're doing with stewardship in the days ahead? If you're not sure what your why is, who needs to be in conversation with you to figure it out? Now, we're going to get on to our third tree. We've talked a little bit about Jesus as our first and foremost tree, talked about knowing your why, and now we're going to get to our third tree. Before we do, I just want to warn you, this is a tree that some folks have a hard time talking about. I do not think that it's the same as climbing a 10-story building 10 times, but just wanted to give you a little warning, a little more humor as we get ready to talk a little bit about money. I spend a lot of my time doing stewardship work, making sure churches don't only talk about money, because we know stewardship is a lot more than money. However, the pendulum tends to swing too far, and we don't talk about money at all. So I want to make sure that you all leave today feeling like you are better equipped when you get ready to talk about stewardship to bring up that money piece, because it's really, really important. But before we get into specifics here, I just want to tie some things together from our forest from earlier. We considered our individuals that were in it, their money motivations, what they do with money, whether they give or not, why is related to that. And then we also talked a little bit about complacency. Again, this is when we say, oh, we don't have to talk about money, we're not having trouble paying our bills. I think that's a little bit of a red flag that we're becoming complacent, because we know that one of our opportunities as stewardship leaders is to help form stewards, to help people on that journey that they're on as disciples. And we know Jesus had a lot to say about money and our relationship with money. I once heard a wonderful presenter say that generosity is not a topic in the Gospels. Generosity is the Gospels. And so part of what we have to do as stewardship leaders is feel comfortable talking about money. And I think if you're uncomfortable with that, again, go back to Jesus. Use Jesus's words. You are bringing those to life for your church. You can preach, you can teach like Jesus, and that might help you a little bit with your own discomfort around talking about money. But again, I think it's a mistake if we are not letting this particular tree be one of the trees that we focus on about in our forest. So why do we talk about money? I think I've already made the point that Jesus talked about it. So let Jesus speak. That simple. Another thing that's really important for you to think about in your ministries is that for some, the Sunday offering may not be enough for you to fully fund all the ministries that you want to fund. But guess what? Good news. People can give beyond the Sunday offering if you talk about it, if you educate them about this, if you let them know what that means. So what does that mean? It means talking about planned giving, estate gifts, different ways that people can give to the church life insurance beneficiary, IRA distribution at the end of the year. If your church has an endowment, are you inviting people to make gifts, not just in the offering plate, sort of to your annual fund of ministries, but also to the endowment. You have people sitting out there in your forest, in your pews, that may not realize that they can give to your church's endowment. MMFA can help you with all of this. We have an entire program that we use with churches. It's free, that helps you bring these kinds of gifts forward in your congregation. It's to help people realize that they can do more than just give online or in the plate come Sunday. So very important aspect that I think a lot of our churches don't have time to get into because you're already overloaded as stewardship leaders, and some of you may have full-time jobs that have nothing to do with stewardship. So again, let MMFA help. This is something that we do, and we do it for free. Finally, why do you need to be talking about money? The time is now. Please, please, please do not wait until you see a drop in giving. Go ahead and start talking about it now if giving is good. If you have experienced a drop in giving, do not panic. There are things that you can do. First, go back to what we talked about earlier with getting a sense of who are the people in your church, their values, their motivations, their experiences. Then take the temperature, see where people are. It is a misstep to suddenly start talking about money if there's a high level of discontent or concern about your ministry. So let people share what are their hopes, because those are going to position you to talk about money in a way that's building off of what people dream for the church. And then you're also able to address those concerns too. So do that forest work. Think about change, how you're going to change related to talking about money. But the time is now. Don't wait until you're really, really behind on budget, because then it's just a lot more stressful. Again, if you are behind on budget, let MMFA help. These are conversations we can help lead. We can also provide you with more tools to have them. The other thing you as church leaders should be considering about in the present, as you're looking at sort of your offering income and the different money pieces that are at play in your ministry, is whether you need to be thinking about any other sources of income. What do I mean about that? By that, applying for grants, repurposing church property, using it in a different way, hopefully to get income. Starting a social enterprise. There's all kinds of different and new emerging things that our ministries are doing that can help increase money that's coming into the church for your ministries. Those are a topic for another webinar, but just know that those are conversations that you can be having too if you have a level of concern about how your giving is going this year and you feel like we've already done everything that we can within the congregation to build generous and faithful stewards. And our fourth and final tree that I want to talk about is potential. God is calling us to steward not just what's in front of us and what we think of as that has been gifted to us, but potential as well. Why is that? Well, stewardship is a journey, as we've already talked about. It's part of discipleship. We are growing as stewards our entire lifetimes. And when we think about our journey through our lives and what that means related to potential, I want you to think about children. Maybe they're your own children, maybe they're your grandchildren, children at your church. We do a really good job with kids of stewarding their potential. We see skills that they have. Maybe they're a fast runner, so we put them in soccer. Maybe they have a good ear for music, so we make sure they're learning piano, taking lessons, and we support them as they grow in this, and we push them and we encourage them. So we are stewarding their potential with a particular gift or talent that they have. I would dare say that with adults, we don't always do such a good job stewarding potential, talents, and skills. So think about this in your ministry. How can you help steward potential in people? How can you help people discover their gifts and put those gifts to use for God's work through your particular church? So something to think about is, how are you as a ministry stewarding people's potential? Why else is this really important? You may remember the Whitney Houston song, "I Believe That Children Are the Future." I'm sure you have heard folks saying, no, children are the now. Even if you're at a church where you're not seeing a lot of young children running around on any given Sunday morning, you've got younger adults in your ministries, and there's people that you can listen to find out what they care about. Again, back to values and experiences and motivations, what's important to them. And is there potential for that in your ministry? I'll give you a great example. I have a lifelong Moravian friend who I realized lately was doing loud silence. I hadn't seen her at church in a long time. I missed her. She's got 4 kids. I know she's busy, but I just reached out to her to touch base a little bit. And I found that the things that she really cared about and were involved in, she wasn't finding a space at our church to be involved in those ways. So I think we've got potential in all of our folks, regardless of their age. But if we're not paying attention, if we're not listening and learning and providing opportunities for folks to share those things with us, we're missing an opportunity. So again, are there spaces in your ministry where you need to be listening to kids, to parents of kids, and learning from them and finding out what matters to them and seeing if God is calling your church in any certain direction? The other thing I want to say here is this is not about church growth. Please don't read that bullet point and think, oh, Laura is saying that we've got to go out and get more young families. I hear that a lot all the time in my own church and any church. We know that children are necessary for us to keep going on as we are in our current state. But I would issue this invitation more through the lens of how can you not grow the church, but be the church? Are there needs in your community related to children and young families that your church could meet? A great example of this is we've got a church here in Winston-Salem, a big group of retired mostly men who are cyclists. And one of the things they've started doing is offering a monthly in their parking lot, because one of their assets is this huge parking lot. Anybody bring your kids' bikes to our church parking lot. We will service them for free. We'll give you a snack. It's probably going to be something like Moravian sugar cake. And the kids can ride their bikes around the parking lot. But if you've got an issue with the bike, a repair needed, whatever it is, come on over once a month and we're going to help you with that. So their goal is not to get more members in the church necessarily. Their goal is to be the church and offer some gifts to folks that are meeting a need in their community. And they're focusing on what can we do now for folks that are in need, that are younger. So I think that that's a really important thing to be thinking about. And then finally, what does potential mean? How is it related to stewardship? We know that God is always at work. God is creating, God is redeeming, God is blessing, and we are invited to be a part of all of that. There is potential for us to do new things to help with God's work in the world all around us. If we are complacent, if we are not listening to people, if we're not aware of our forest as a whole and we're stuck on certain trees, we may miss some of these opportunities to see potential ways we can use gifts that we have as ministries for God's work in the world. So just be aware. We know God is always giving. God is always doing something. Any day that we wake up, we get a chance to be involved in that. That's potential. And we've all got potential in us with those gifts and skills that we have that can be put to use for this work. So how are you as stewardship leaders, how are we as ministries providing a space for potential to be stewarded along with everything else? Here's a great model that can help you figure this out. I like this one a lot. Where is God calling you as a church? What does your community need, your neighborhood, even broader? And then what does your congregation need? And what's at the center of those 3 things? I think this is a really wonderful way for you to say, hey, what's that potential that we could be stewarding? Again, where is God calling us? What does our community need? And then what does our congregation need? What's at the middle of those 3 things? A church that I know that did this a while ago, what the congregation needed was to feed people. They had a lot of people that loved to cook, and they always were coming up with different ways to offer meals. They were having a hard time getting people to come on the church campus for those meals due to the location and how the neighborhood was changing. But that congregation really needed to use their gifts to feed people. And they felt God calling them to feed people. What their community needed, of course, they had plenty of people that needed food. They had a lack of access and some systems that needed some work so that they could connect folks who were experiencing hunger with people that had food to give. And so the church leaders worked in partnership with some other community leaders to design something that would enable the congregation to feed people, answer that call that they felt and gifted to do, and meet the community's needs where they were. And it turned into a mobile food pantry, if you're wondering. So again, their goal wasn't let's grow the church. It was let's be the church. And they spent some time around potential and what they could do to find that sweet spot that's there in the middle that they could do in God's name for God's glory. So where are we going to go from here? Don't worry, we're not getting ready to go on a more strenuous loop. I hope you appreciate my forest and my tree humor. Let's look quickly at a few forestry essentials. You've got a sense of who is in the forest. You've thought a little bit about the temperature to figure out whether there's something you need to address to stabilize that temperature, whether it's the ideal temperature. Maybe you've found out people's hopes and concerns that's helping you make that decision. And you're also aware of whether there's capacity for and readiness for change. So here are some different essentials to consider as you keep going. First, don't go it alone. Find some people to go with you. Don't hear me saying you need to form a stewardship committee, although I always think it's great to have one if you've got the capacity for that. But if you don't, think for a minute about people at your church who love the church deeply, who have hopes for it, who may have concerns for it, but who are invested, who care about it, and invite them into conversation about this forest and tree integrated stewardship approach. Maybe your church board is the ideal audience for this. I hope that it is, but it might not be. It might just be a smaller group and some folks that you know will be responsive to this kind of conversation. So invite them to go with you and see where the Spirit leads you as you talk about these different essentials. The next thing that you need to do is set some realistic goals. Too often we're excited, we've got some new ideas, and we charge in and put our time and our talent into executing those ideas without saying first, hey, what do we hope will come from this? So set some realistic goals before you go too much further down the road. I am not saying overhaul your entire stewardship ministry or start from scratch with a stewardship ministry. I doubt that anybody has time and energy for that. So I think, again, goals that are realistic for you. Maybe it's we're going to pour our energy into this one thing, this one tree. We're going to make sure Jesus is at the center of everything, or we're going to make sure that we talk about money in ways that are healthy and meaningful for people. Whatever it is, set some realistic goals around it that you can achieve. And then make those goals even more realistic. What does that mean? Define a few things. What's success going to look like? So if we say our goal is to make sure that people understand what Jesus had to say about stewardship, what will success look like? How will you know that you've reached that? What's your sort of current reality around this? Is there anything that's holding you back from being able to go for it? And is there anything you can build on to help you reach a goal? So this is sort of the creative design way of approaching goal setting, but just make sure you're clear on what you're hoping to see as the outcome and anticipating obstacles, just going in with as much knowledge as you can before you embark down the path any further. And then finally, you're ready to develop an action plan. And that's just decision making. How are we going to reach these goals? Specifically, what are the practical things that we're going to do? If you're going to talk about Jesus more, who's going to be part of that conversation? If you're going to talk about money more, what do you need to plan for there? Are there opportunities in your ministries for you to be creative and to bring these topics to people in ways that will be especially impactful? Maybe it's during worship, maybe it's also during small groups, Bible study, whatever that looks like for your church. Who are you going to talk to when about these different aspects of stewardship? And then what are some of the things you can do action-wise so that you go into 2025 with a really healthy sense of where your church is and where you want to go and how stewardship's going to be a part of that. You may be thinking, gosh, I don't have capacity. We as leaders don't have capacity to pay attention to Jesus and the why that's at the center and money and potential. Those were our 4 trees, right? So pick the ones that you do have capacity for and build your action plan around that. Again, MMFA has an entire tool kit, tool chest, tool belt with different things that can help you in all of these different areas. And we don't want you to go it alone. And we will go with you and we'll do that for free. So there's no cost for you to utilize our services with stewardship. Now let's talk specifically, because I want you to leave today feeling like you've been given some really practical things that you can do. And hopefully you do already, but here's a few more, and we're gonna do one per tree that we talked about. So our first one is Jesus. That was our first tree, rightfully so. So look at Jesus' teaching about stewardship, Jesus' example around stewardship, and identify 4 and focus on 1 per quarter. Teach it, preach it, communicate about it. However, again, your church receives information, make sure they are learning about Jesus' example as the ultimate steward. You may be thinking, what are some of the different things that Jesus did that could be our focus per quarter? Use your gifts, serve others, make the most of the time that you have on this earth. Be ready to sacrifice. I think those are sort of the 4 things that come to my mind of the example that Jesus set as a steward. So maybe those 1 per quarter are your focuses next year. Then let's think a little bit about that why, that golden circle where why is in the center, the core belief. This is ex-Moravian church. This is why we are a church. This is why we do what we do. I imagine that why is going to be grounded in God and Jesus and all things love. But I don't know specifically what it will look like for your church. Maybe you already have a mission statement or a vision statement that you're utilizing. If not, that could be a place to start. If that seems overwhelming, and I know for a lot of church boards it does, and ministry leaders, it is overwhelming, look at some of the different small groups within your church and ask them to write a why statement. We did this recently for my women's, at my church, our women's retreat committee. We were asked to write sort of a why do we have a retreat? And that was a really fun exercise for us as a group, and it made us think a little differently. And we actually, as we were planning, we changed a little bit because we had this why now for why we have a women's retreat at my church. So again, think about some of those vibrant ministries where there are life in your congregation and ask them why. Why do you exist? I think about how often I get the chance to sit with folks who've been part of a Sunday school class for decades, and that class is so meaningful to them, and they are showing up every Sunday to be a part of it, or more Sundays than not. Why? Why is that Sunday school? Why is it in existence? Why does it do what it does? So I think you could get a lot of stewardship mileage out of inviting some of your committees, your different groups at your church to write a why statement. Then share those, celebrate them. Have a ministry of the month that you focus on. And this month we're lifting up our music ministry. Why? Why music? Why choir? Why handbells? Again, you're not necessarily asking people to join. The goal is not to get more people to do it, although I hope that's a pleasant byproduct of this effort. But it's really to inspire folks to appreciate the fullness of what they experience for being a part of your ministry, and then connecting those dots to see that, hey, I may not have the gift of singing. I'm not going to be part of the choir, but the money that I'm giving on any given Sunday is helping support this really important ministry for others. So it's a way to connect dots for people as they experience that inspiration that comes from learning more about the why. Our practical step around money is to make numbers meaningful. What does that mean? You want to make sure that people understand that connection between money and ministry. If you are not comfortable talking about money, think about the ministries that you have that are so meaningful to you, that are meaningful to your folks in your church. Those exist because of people's gifts of time, talent, and treasure. So make that leap between money to ministry. Easy ways to do that are to narrate the church's budget. If you don't want to do it for the whole year, just do it for a month or a quarter, and MMFA can help with that. Develop a whole series of did you knows that tell the church specifics around money. Did you know that the church is saving money in this way? We're doing this thing to save money, and that means that we have money here for this ministry. So I know a lot of churches that have made efforts around environmental stewardship and electricity. We are saving electricity. That means we've got more money to support our feeding ministry. So make those direct connections between numbers, how much money is being saved, and what that money means for another ministry. Another thing that I love is to build a scale model. What does that mean? Shrink something and simplify it. So rather than talking about the whole church budget, we got to do a little work and determine, again, when we look at our annual budget, what percent is going to worship, what percent is going to Christian education, what percent is going to missions, whatever that looks like. Again, MFA can help, but then shrink it down and you've got $1. And maybe you've figured out, I hope so, that a quarter of your church budget is going to outreach and mission. So then you can tell people for their $1 that they give, 25 cents is going to this. So it makes it something that's easy for people to understand and relate to. And I think when people people hear money presented in this way, it's easier for them to start to see the impact. If I gave a little more, because we're only talking about $1, it's not that you're inviting them to give $1 more, but they start to see, gosh, the impact of each dollar, how those monies are going to ministry. And I think it's a really subtle way to start growing people in their financial generosity. And finally, we've got a practical step around potential. I'm going to call it a steward's corner. So, and this actually came from a Presbyterian church that I had the joy of it going to several years ago. So they had a steward's corner in their bulletin, but it was the entire back side of their bulletin. And they did a really good job of sharing financial information, but then they also shared gifts of time and talent, gave thanks for those. They had quotes from people who had benefited from particular gifts of time and talent. They tended to highlight, the pastor told me they highlighted certain ministries there. But it was just a space that the congregation knew would always be present, where they could go to receive certain information related to stewardship. So again, if you've got your whys from your small groups in your church, this could be a place where you're sharing one of those whys. Not necessarily every week, if that's too much, but once a month, once a quarter, however it works for your ministry. But carving out a space that's intentional around stewardship, that's helping people see the whole picture of it, that it's not just about money, but yes, money is a part of it, and sharing news and celebrations and invitations and inspirations there, sort of integrating all those pieces together in a space that folks can access and receive from you. So what are your next steps? You're going to get an email later. It's going to have slides, recording, and key points. That'll probably land in your inbox no later than tomorrow. We will also invite you to give us a survey on the webinar and give us feedback on how we did. Give me feedback on how I did and how we can improve. Next step 2 is some discernment. I always tell people, take some time to pray on this. Think about it, reflect on it. What bubbles up for you? Where do you feel like God is leading you, your ministry? And then decide what you're going to do, who's going to go with you, why you're doing it, when, all of those various pieces that are important. I'm going to encourage you to get back into the woods. Again, that's thinking about your individuals, taking the temperature, and doing some work around whether you're ready for change. What is it, a small change? Is it a big change? What that could look like, what your leaders feel comfortable with, but don't be afraid to get back in there. Please schedule a time to talk with me. I'd be happy to talk to you more about this content, about MFA stewardship services in general. Would love to meet with you, your stewardship leaders, your joint board, however that could look. So let me know and jump on our website. It is in the middle of a enhancement, refurbishment, whatever you want to call it. So it'll look different later this year, but for now, we've still got a lot of really great resources and tools that would love for you to access that could help you, I think, as you take steps with stewardship over the days to come. So we have reached the end. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then see what questions we have. Hannah, do you want to go ahead and if there are any questions in the chat box, go ahead and let me know, or we'll open up for other folks to ask too. But Hannah, anything that we need to talk about that you see in the chat?
As far as questions, there are none in the chat right now, but we did have Jay say that their why is at their church is to know Christ and make him known. So.
Great. Thanks, Jay. That's a wonderful why, and I hope that guides a lot of what you're doing related to stewardship over the days ahead. And I'd love to see your different committees and groups at East Hills explore their whys as it relates to that bigger why. That would be a cool activity for folks. Well, I'm going to open it up to you all for questions. If not, I've got a question for you, but want to give you a chance to unmute and ask any questions that you have in the remaining minutes that we've got. A lot to think about, I know. Let me ask you a question then, hearing none. Anybody want to share? That first question that we led off with in the woods was, is there a particular tree of stewardship that you feel like your ministry is really focused on? And that may be a good thing, that may be right for you right now, but any trees that you're focusing on that may be getting in the way of a whole or more integrated view of the stewardship forest. Anybody got a tree they want to share?
Uh, I will share. I'm not sure this is what you're looking for, but something we started doing maybe 3 years ago is we felt that time, talent, treasure wasn't sufficient. And so we added a fourth we call legacy. And it's allowed us to more easily talk about things like estate planning and that kind of stuff, but also to talk about legacy in terms of your faith and have you shared that with others, kind of your legacy as that aspect as well. So it's just given us another channel to communicate stewardship things.
Thanks, Jay. I like that because we know stewardship is whole life. It's everything that we're doing our whole lives. So I love that addition and getting people to think of it in that way as well. We also know that as folks age, one of the sort of final developmental stages is to think about legacy, to think about our lives and be able to weave all the chapters together and find meaning in it. And I think when we have conversations in our churches that are along the lines of what you're talking about, Jay, you're helping people that are at that stage of life do a little of that, see how the church has played into who they are and will play into the rest of their lives too. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Other stewardship trees that you're focusing on, any that are getting in the way, possibly, or any questions, any comments before we wrap up our time? I know a lot of churches tend to only go hiking and go in the forest in the fall because stewardship is very much associated with the budget for the next year. If you are a church that invites commitments or pledges or intentions to give, usually that's in the fall for the coming year. It's hard to break out of that pattern. So I hope your takeaway might be, how can I talk about stewardship throughout the year in different ways? Again, if you pick Jesus as a focus area, each quarter you've got one aspect of Jesus' ministry around stewardship, Jesus' teachings, a parable. That's an easy way to start talking about stewardship year round, because you're not asking for money year round. You're just teaching about Jesus, which is what the church should be doing. So I hope you've taken away a strategy that you can use to start to shift we only talk about stewardship maybe one time of year, which exists in a lot of our churches. Yes, Bruce.
So, as many of you may know, we're struggling financially as a church, and we decided to try and engage the congregation by a new outreach ministry. We have a mission that is close to us that provides food and a little bit of lodging for people in need within our county. And we got excited about it as a board, and so we wrote a grant application for the funds that the MMFA had gathered from the Day of Giving, and we received the grant. And we decided that in order to give that grant money out, we would invite the principals from the mission to come and spend some time with us after our service last Sunday. And we decided that we would queue it up as a fundraiser for that particular project. And the board was at odds as to whether or not we should set the bar really low for the additional congregational giving. We thought maybe 200 was too much to consider. But the board decided to set it at $500. And so we had the fundraiser on Sunday. Basically, people were able to contribute $5 to $10 for a soup starter kit, which would fund that ministry. And much to our delight, we not only had a successful event, but we raised $675 in additional giving from the congregation. And so we've got a level of excitement now within the church to say, we've got something else to focus on now, which is outreach, not just keeping our doors open. And, we're all very happy about that.
Thank you for sharing that example, Bruce. I'm excited about that for a lot of different reasons. I think it touches on some of the points that we learned about today. I think because your goal at Lake Auburn with that was not to grow the church, but to be the church. You're meeting needs in your community. You're inspiring people. I think feeding people, there's a very obvious why to that at the center of it. It's certainly following Jesus' example. So I feel like that's a great story to share. So thank you for that. I also think you all took a risk to do that, not knowing what would happen. And so I'm delighted that your leadership felt comfortable with doing that, and look forward to hearing more about that partnership with the ministry as it keeps going. So thanks for that. I did not ask Bruce to share that story, but I appreciate him sharing it because MMFA did provide a grant to Lake Auburn for that particular program. So if you all are not familiar with our grant program, when you get the email from me, let me know and I'll be happy to tell you more about that. But we've got grant money available for Moravian churches in a lot of different areas like hunger and thirst. So we'd be delighted to talk to you about the next time we're going to have a cycle, which will be in 2025. So I am aware of our time. We're at 1 o'clock and I did not want to keep you, or 1:01, didn't want to keep you more than an hour. So thank you for the extra couple of minutes. Appreciate your presence with us today. Again, look for the email that will have the various components of today's content as well as a survey. We appreciate your feedback. I read every single one of those and it helps me do better, helps MFA do better in this space. So please share that with us and let me know what we can do to help. Again, we don't want you to go it alone. We're here. This is one of the core services that we offer to the church, and we're delighted to work with your ministry. So blessings as your day continues, and I look forward to hearing from you and connecting with you soon. Thanks.